Hi, I'm Toni Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Hi, I'm Toni Williams, and welcome to Brooklyn Savvy. We're going to be talking about white fragility on this episode, and this is part of the two-part episode. So I hope you caught the other episode where we basically talked about the Getting Uncomfortable book club, and now we're going to plow into this whole area of white fragility. So before I get started, let me introduce our guest. We have Ellen Gottlieb from the Getting Uncomfortable book club. We have Mary Ellen Kramer from the Getting Uncomfortable book club. And we have Kara Sadownik. I got that right this time, Kara, from the Getting Uncomfortable book club. And then, of course, our Brooklyn Savvy Penalistas, Lisa Bing, Maria De Longoria, Jennifer Jones Austin, and Phyllis Whitethorn. So thank you all, ladies, for joining this really important conversation because, you know, women make a difference, right? We know how to make a difference. We plow in, you know, we know what's real, okay? And I'm sorry, you know, you men in the audience, take it or leave it, but we got together and we decided that we really wanted to explore white fragility because all of us are working and we're in workplaces and we deal with issues around systemic racism a lot. So, Toby, talk to us about what white fragility is.
White fragility is being defensive and in denial that we have privilege and power based on society's definition of what being white means.
Now, I want to segue now to Dr. Maria De Longoria. Let's talk about white supremacy. What does that mean? Because typically when you talk about white supremacy, people think about those folks that were in the Capitol, you know, burning the place down, you know. So what is it, Maria?
Well, it goes much deeper than that. And it's, I think we kind of talked about it in some of our previous conversations when we were talking about the structure and the nature of the society, right? Because we say it's built on white supremacy. So what exactly does that mean? That means that its society is created for white folks. It is created for the benefit of white folks. And it applies to all white folks, even though it didn't necessarily intend to apply to all white folks in the very beginning. It kind of evolves out of this concept of race. And we kind of talked about that on other shows also about this concept of race. And so the idea of what we call racial categories and this whole idea of racial differences and things like that, race is socially constructed, right? And when I say that, we're talking about this idea that there was no, if you go back in history, there was no real concept of these are black people and these are white people and these are brown people and these are blue people and these are yellow people, right? There were people, and there were people who had different ethnicities and different religions and different cultures, and I'll use in different nations, right? And I'm using nations versus the word tribes. And so you had people who were clustered that way. And it was only this whole concept of race was developed as a way to control and empower and enslave and marginalize and colonize other people, right? And a lot of it was economic in motivation. And that's what we see play out now. And so if you think back, you know, you often hear people say, you know, that black people enslaved black people. But what really is, the concept was more as you had different ethnicities, right, participating for different reasons and different levels in the enslavement of people. It was not that I'm capturing my black brothers and sisters. When you look at the Sunni and the Shiites, right, they don't look like they're fighting their brothers or their sisters. They identify as two culturally religious different groups. And that's how societies used to be. And it was with this colonization, right, with the establishment of the slave trade that you really saw this concept of black and white kind of play out, particularly in American society, and the rest of the world follows.
So talk to us also about how one became white throughout this history of this country. You didn't, not everybody was white back in the 1700s. It was something that I don't know how to explain it. Could you?
Yeah, I could take a stab at it, right? And
Right.
so everybody wasn't white, but everybody wasn't black, right? So
Right.
if you were not white, that didn't make you black.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, that's the distinction I need to make. So when people came over as immigrants, right, they were unwelcome, and the unwelcome, getting tongue tied here. The unwelcome immigrants were the ones who then were not white, but again, they weren't black for about a generation. Right. And I'll use the Italians as an example. The Italians were considered not white. The Jews were considered not white for, let's say, the time period where they were allowed to integrate, where you can change your name, you can change an accent. They were able to blend into American society. They adopted American traditions and American values, which then devalued the other people who were then not white coming in behind them. And so that's how people became white in society. You can't do that for people of color the same way you were able to do that with, again, I'm going to just use Italians as an example.
Wait, Maria, can you also talk about how, I guess, we became black? That, you talk about how this country was formed, that and that race is a social and economic construct, that the laws were written such that black people were not full citizens, were not full humans. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's a really critical piece to the story.
Yeah. So one of the things that happens, right, was there was this thought process on how are we going to keep these people, right? How are we going to keep control of people? How are we going to keep them categorized? Black people, right? How are we going to keep them categorized as and keep them enslaved? And especially because there was a lot of race mixing. And because of that, they came up with this one-drop rule. They also came up with this condition of that.
Can you say what the one-drop rule is?
The 1/8 and 1/16, right?
Yeah. I was going to get that.
Okay.
I was going to get to that, but I'll go ahead and do it now. So the one-drop rule was that if you were one drop black, you were black. If you could have a black grandmother or black great-grandmother, a black great-great-grandmother, that made you black. It didn't matter if everybody else in your family was what we consider white. That one drop made you black. Now, when I started to say about the status of being enslaved, because there was so much mixing, right, during slavery, they came up with another rule that the status of the child, and I'm going to explain this further, the status of the child took after the mother. You had a lot of societies that are patriarchal, right? So you're and we still are now. So if someone gets married, right, the woman takes the man's name, the children take the man's name, and they kind of follow in that kind of cultural footstep. But what was happening was you had a lot of white men having children with black women. And and so if they still went with the patriarchal society, then all these little black babies are free. That was not desirable. That was not how the society was constructed. So the law was then changed that the condition of a child was reflective of the condition of the mother. So if the mother is enslaved, then the child is enslaved. And that was one of the ways that slavery was perpetuated and was able to last for so long with the numbers that it had.
Now, Jennifer, you want to do? Yeah.
I just wanted to add that very often when we talk about race and we talk about racism, we do not engage in a conversation about the role that religion has played in the creation and perpetuation of race and racism. Race as a social construct. We do not lean in and appreciate how white people used the Bible, beginning with the Old Testament and moving into the New Testament, to justify racism. That
elaborate, please. Yes.
Well, beginning with the enslavement of Jewish persons, and that was their lot in life until God said otherwise, and so it was okay to have an enslaved people. The fact that Protestants were largely the ones who owned slaves, and very often the slave masters were the church ministers and the deacons. And what they would do is they would look at the biblical teachings and they'd find ways to rationalize slavery, looking at Black persons as less than human, appreciating that the Bible said that God did not see a difference between people based on, he didn't see color. He didn't see people, Jews, Gentiles, everybody was one in his eyes, right? So what they did was they determined that Blacks were subhuman, and that was a way of justifying, of aligning the Bible with the practices that they were carrying out. And it is that religion that allowed racism to persist even in the present day.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how does that coexist with the Bible being the inspired word of God?
Well, isn't the Bible, and I am by no means
just
a
asking,
theological scholar, but
yeah.
but just as a layperson, the Bible is an interpretation. The application of the Bible is all interpretive. So it's just like statistics, right? You can make numbers tell any story that you want. The Bible is often used in the same way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And let's keep in mind that the Bible was written by people who interpret it.
Right.
Like they wrote stories as they experienced them or they perceived them, right? So let's begin there. But let's also add that we continue today. People go to the Bible and they find the scriptures that work for them.
Right? Absolutely.
And they interpret the scriptures in a way that, so it's like the notion of I believe it when I see it. It's really I see what I believe.
Well, even the fact that there are different versions of the Bible, right, and that there are books that are said to be left out of the, I'll say, King James version of the Bible, right, and there's that speculation that King James and Shakespeare were closely related or one and the same. I mean, that is a theory, right? Whether you believe it or not. The fact
or he
that
was a black man, King James.
Yes,
the Bible. It was a black man.
And that because there is that conversation, right? You have to question, what the actual source is. None of us can read the actual source.
Right.
We have to trust that somebody is telling us what it accurately says.
But you know what? This is interesting. However, there's something that I want us to get to. And it is Black women and white women as it comes to racial reconciliation. And I think that where it shows up, racism shows up in the workplace and where we work because it's an economic system. So I want to know how do you, Ellen, how do you relate to the women of color that you work with, or how does your business see people of color? Can you speak of that without jeopardizing yourself?
That's a great question. I mean, that's a good question. It's a little hard to answer. We're all independent contractors. So, but what I can say, what is happening now, I will say I'm like you, the word they use, the panelistas here use is the word oblivious. I live in my little bubble. And my bubble just got bursted over the summer with the killing of George Floyd. But so I may not.
Hey, Ellen, can I just jump in for a second and suggest that you talk about, so the question came up also about reading. And I think that, and it's a fair question, right? So, it's a good thing to start a book club and it's a good thing to read. But the question that Jennifer poses is an important one. At what point do you start acting? And, Ellen, I'd like you to talk about the actions, the concrete actions that you're taking in your business as a result of your new awareness.
Okay.
Coaching, etc.
I didn't know that was the question.
Well,
we'll take that on.
That's why she jumped a little ahead. I want to give you a chance to explain, but keep going. Yeah,
I can help you out, Ellen, if you want, because I know a lot of what you do.
Okay, great.
That's what I'm doing too.
Okay. Thank you. It's hard to hear a little bit here, but immediately I joined the Diversity and Inclusion Council, right? And the problem we have there is, what are the actions? And the actions we can take as realtors is we can mentor. So there's mentoring and there's education. So it's mentoring younger up and coming realtors to be successful, because a lot of the, I guess the complaints are, you're financially capped, right? So if we could train and teach younger brokers, who brokers of color, then it would give a leg up, is one. And the other is education, teaching people how to know their avenues of purchasing real estate, which allows them to build equity and invest themselves, but do it in the correct way, right? Because there have been people that have taken advantage of people that didn't know how to invest in real estate. But so those two avenues, and the Diversity and Inclusion Council, they are mad because they just want to do actions. They don't want to talk. And I had that conversation with you, Lisa. They want to act. And so that's where we are. We're acting. And I actually have taken on someone that I'm mentoring. And he came to me. I didn't actually go to him. He came to me, and he's a Black man, and I'm so happy that I get to mentor him. So I don't know.
Kara, you were going to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the Diversity Council that I know that Ellen's on, and I wanted to be on, but that's a different conversation. It was full, which is a really good thing, I have to say. I was impressed with how many people stepped up for it. Yeah, I mean, I think mentoring definitely is part of it. I mean, I think also one of the things I've been doing, which is a small action, but I think, greater things are made up of lots and lots of small actions. So I've been reaching out to other brokers of color that I work with, that I get along with, that, we communicate and we can co-broke together, which means we work on deals together and we share information together. There's this idea of social capital, right? It's like you've got information, and how do you get to it if you're like cut out of the groups, right? And so people need to bring you in and say, did you know about this? Do you know about that? What about this? What have you got? Here's what I've got. And how can we help each other, and how can we support each other? I mean, even very small actions like on social media, when somebody's there's so many Black women on my social media feed, and when they've posted that they've put something into contract or they've sold something, to applaud them and to support them instead of tearing them down, and to let them know, I'm here for you. If you have any questions, if I can be supportive, and they can support me too. I mean, I have so much to learn from other people. Absolutely. That's why I'm here. So that's some more of it.
So Toni, can I speak to the whole Diversity Council piece? Because you raised this issue in one of the conversations about what companies are doing. And it's great that individuals are taking actions. But let's talk also about the systemic and the organizational, because I'm working with organizations. I've been working with one now and creating an action plan towards this in this regard. And one of the things that I would caution against around diversity councils, it's a good start, but to make sure that, number one, you have the support of the C-suite, that there are actual resources, monetary resources behind these actions, and that the councils are not used as another way of checking boxes. So that's a caution that I need to put out to councils, because many of them are not savvy enough, and it's not a criticism, to recognize the power structures and what's really needed to make these changes.
Yeah, I'm
Mary Ellen.
Tony's so right on that. I mean, not Toni, I'm sorry. Lisa is so right on that point.
Right.
We have had more diversity and equity and inclusion conversations and councils and organizations over the course of the last 20 to 25 years. Every other, I'm an attorney. And so many of my Black sisters who are attorneys are now diversity, equity, and inclusion officers for corporations, Fortune 500 companies. And then why, with all of this DEI work that we're doing, are Black women represented just 8% of corporate jobs and less than 4% of C-suite jobs? Why do we have fewer Black corporate execs, male and female today, than we did 20 years ago. And so I appreciate the DEI work, but I think we need to look at whether or not it comes in
the right work. Yeah.
Conversations and like, let's hire some more people at the lower level, but not where change is really made.
And where the real money is. Mary Ellen, what is your company doing in terms of this, or what have you done?
Well, I'd like to speak to the nonprofit world. Okay. So I'm actually board chair of an organization that serves people in New York State prisons with therapeutic community services and also upon reentry. And if you look at this sector, this nonprofit sector, what you see is a lot of white women my age running organizations that are serving communities of color. So we just, since we started this conversation, we said, this is it. And our executive director is now a gentleman who used to be a corrections officer in a New York State prison. He's African-American. And we are now filling our board with people who are representative and people who are interested in the communities that these people are coming back to, namely that they are people of color themselves. And, what I'm on a coalition right now, which we've all formed, and this is our mission, that we are now going to have people in positions of power in nonprofit who are people of color.
Excellent. That's fantastic. Now, Phyllis, is there anything that you want to add to this conversation? Because I haven't heard from you, and I want to make sure I hear from everybody.
Sure. One of the things that is hopeful about what I'm hearing in terms of these organizations that are looking at people of color, that's what I'm hearing in a different way, because for the longest time, and still, when people see people of color, they have a background conversation. They already have a perception, that that is very often so ingrained in their consciousness that they don't even recognize it. And so as people of color come to job interviews, or already in organizations where they're doing excellent work, very often better work of higher quality than their white counterparts. And then a position comes along, or an opportunity for a higher position, and they're not even considered. And why is that? It's not that people haven't recognized the work that they're doing, but the perception around this person of color is that they cannot do the job. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with organizations and people will ask them, so why is there not greater diversity? Oh, I can't find people of color that can meet the qualifications. Now, we know that that's not true, because there are people of color that are attorneys, there are people of color in every genre, every work environment that are excelling. What that means is, and to me, is that they're stopped because of what you perceive they're able to do when you look at the color of their skin. And so as we talk and we have these conversations, and George Floyd, I mean, I've got to say, this pandemic, I look at one of the silver linings of this pandemic, it slowed us down. It slowed us down so that we can see, we can think, and we can make choices moving forward. And I know this is a horrific pandemic, I have to tell you, but if we can make some changes here, some really sustainable change, then we can look at that as a really positive thing, because this is eating our country from the inside out.
Yes.
It's like a cancer.
Yes.
And if this has been a time where we can discover this and we can really do something about it, then it's very important.
Well, we have not a lot of time left. Okay, well,
I just want to say what Ellen's talking about is critical. Building, like in bringing people into your network, That's what's critical, because
Absolutely.
Phyllis talks about Black people not being qualified to do the job. The truth of the matter, Phyllis, is that sometimes they are not. But what distinct, and it's not, and sometimes white people aren't.
Right.
The distinction is that white people have networks that give them the supports that they need, that Black people do not. I remember when I went to law school and all the white kids were hanging out at the bar, like from 7 o'clock on. And I was like, well, I've got to read these cases and I've got to write up these case notes. And then it was like 3 or 4 months in, I realized, oh, they were getting the notes from the year before and the year before that. So they were reading notes. They weren't reading the cases. They weren't reading 100, 150 pages every night. They were just reading the case notes.
Right.
It's the networking that makes the difference.
Yeah, that's a.
I know. Yeah, I'm gonna. You know what?
That's the social capital.
Time. We're pressing against time. I wanted to ask about racial humility. Toby, you want to talk a little bit about that racial humility,
Sure.
what that means, how it'll make a difference going forward?
Yes, racial humility is just an understanding of how much white people don't know and accepting that. And also not using our whiteness, our advantage, our power, our privilege as a lens to judge people of color. And I think that's something that's done all the time as a way to protect privilege and whiteness.
I think that is a great place to end. This was a great conversation. We grew together. We're going to continue to grow together. And we will see you next time on Brooklyn Savvy.